Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Filter. On this show, we recognize that the world can be a confusing place to live in. And so what I seek to do on this show is to equip you to live with biblical clarity in our confusing world, so that you can face the chaos of life with wisdom, integrity, and courage. On today's show, I'm glad to welcome Samuel James. Samuel is the Associate Acquisitions Editor at Crossway. He is the author of Digital Liturgies, a regular newsletter on Christianity, technology, and culture. He lives in Louisville, Kentucky with his wife, Emily, and their 3 children. Samuel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Aaron. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you on today. We're going to be talking about your new book that has just come out with Crossway called Digital Liturgies, Rediscovering Christian Wisdom in an Online Age. I was telling you before we got started that I've really enjoyed your book, and that technology and understanding it well, living with it well in our world today is a recurring theme here on the podcast. So whenever I saw that you were coming out with this book, I knew it was one that I was certainly interested in talking about. How long have you been writing about technology, and what initially piqued your interest in this topic?
Yeah, so I think I've been probably on this beat for about 4 or 5 years. I think the 2016 election and kind of the fallout from that is what drove me to kind of a first interrogation of social media and what could be the potential effects on Christians. Like how are we talking to each other differently? How are we thinking about things differently because of these ways of processing information and communicating to one another? So I think the election in 2016 was probably kind of the initial spark that had me thinking that way. So I, in my blog, and the blog eventually became a Substack newsletter, I would write, short little reflections on kind of how I was noticing difficulties reading, or how I kind of was reflecting on the ways that streaming services kind of push their particular products on us, and then doing a lot of reading on the side about kind of really an anthropology of technology, not so much theology, since a lot of the people that I was reading weren't Christians per se, but they were kind of interested in the intersection of human thinking and digital platforms. And it was one book in particular, Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, that really crystallized for me the idea of there being a shape to the way that technology influences not just what we say, but how we talk, how we communicate, and then how we think to ourselves, how we form ideas. And Carr kind of gave me the physiological or the cognitive blueprint for how this could be true. And then when I started to look at technology kind of from his angle, I saw the theological implications of what he was saying, that God has given us minds, and he's given us revelation that has to be very carefully parsed. And you have, in many of these social media technologies, you have tools that are calibrated precisely to elicit kind of a knee-jerk emotional response. You have a way of reading and a way of processing information that in many cases is simply inferior to analog reading. And so our ability to comprehend big truth is handicapped really by the media of digital technology. And that was Nicholas Carr's big point. And then to apply that carefully to theological categories is kind of what led me on the journey toward writing this book.
Yeah, I love Carr's book. That's one of the ones that I've read before, and it's just, I agree with you. It's excellent. Really helpful to understand how digital technologies are shaping us and forming us even more, or probably far more than we are shaping them. That's a consistent theme throughout your book that I think you explained really well, and we're going to get into that a little bit more deeply. But just, so the audience here that we're talking to today is primarily Christians. And I think many Christians, whenever they think about technology and the use of it, they think, well, the only ethical concerns are the content, and is it good or bad? And if I'm consuming bad content, well, then obviously that's bad for my spiritual walk. And if it's good, then good. But you start the book by trying to help the reader understand that the web itself has an impact on our spiritual lives. Can you start to introduce that topic for us?
Sure. So a lot of evangelicals, as you say, are primarily focused on content. So the question of what do I use the internet for? So if I use it for good things, if I use it to bad things, that's kind of the operative question. There's no kind of intrinsic nature or character to the internet. We're simply thinking of content. And I think there's reason to believe that it's not just content, but it's also form. So the form of the web itself is actually pushing us towards certain ways of thinking and feeling that undermine Christian discipleship, that undermine thinking, undermine relating to one another the way God would have us do. And the internet is especially designed for a certain kind of reactive, more kind of multitasking, kind of skimming, kind of quick shot way of processing information, because that's what a computer does. That's the nature of a computer. The nature of a computer is to take very small bites of information and process them as quickly as you can. And then the nature of the web in particular is built on kind of this infrastructure of diverting attention. So you go to a web page, and the web page is designed in such a way so as to kind of block your eyes in various places. So that's why people can feel, especially the illusion of multitasking. We know cognitively that multitasking is not a thing. Like, it's actually impossible to split your attention genuinely in different directions. You're going to do several things poorly instead of a lot of things adequately. But it is true that the attention kind of that we bring to the web is immediately diffused through just the way the web captures our attention. So there's a lot of discussion about this in Nicholas Carr's book. And so when we think about this from a Christian perspective, I think it's worth examining the fact that when we communicate with each other on social media, so say we're kind of wading into the latest theological controversy, or we're kind of following this Christian guru or influencer type of personality, when we do that, we are actually very subject to all of these dynamics. And these dynamics greatly undermine kind of the call to careful reflection, the call to kind of biblical wisdom that we see in Scripture. And wisdom in Scripture is very closely tied to a sense of embodied reality. We receive the world as it truly is, as the way God made it. God made us not as minds that can just project without bodies, but He made us with minds and bodies, with hands and feet, with hair and with skin. And that is just an irreducible part of who we are. And eschatologically speaking, that's who we're always going to be. We're going to have glorified bodies, but we're going to be embodied creatures nonetheless. And so what happens, the book's big question is, what happens when you take this kind of immersive digital habitat where people try to think and try to contemplate and try to kind of communicate with each other, and all these things that Nicholas Carr refers to as intellectual technologies, kind of technologies that kind of shape how we talk and how we conceive of ourselves and of the world. What happens when you place embodied creatures in that habitat, and basically they start to live and act and communicate as if they are not embodied, as if they are simply content producing avatars, or self-perpetuating wills that can simply delete whatever at any moment, that can project whatever kind of image we want to at any given moment. So I think that's a crisis of discipleship, because that's not who we are. We are not the kind of selves that we project online. We don't live that way. We aren't designed by God that way. And so what is the cumulative effect of the form of the web, not just the content? Is it possible that our hearts and our emotions are being calibrated in a sub-Christian way, even if the content we're consuming on the web is supposedly okay. And there's a lot of good content on the web. This is not a denial of that. It's not a
Hmm.
argument for the intrinsic evil of the internet. But is it still possible that this could be a non-neutral tool, that actually we could be being shaped in particular ways because of the nature of this technology? And that's what Nicholas Carr and people like Neil Postman and Marshall McLuhan, they all said this. They all said that there is actually an intellectual ethic of these technologies. And I think that holds up very well under a Christian assumption of who people are.
Yeah, these technologies are shaping and forming us, and they're changing us. One time I was talking about this to a group of college students, and I asked them, is it a good thing that you have access to the internet, the whole internet with all of its information in your pocket all the time? And they all reflexively said, yeah, of course it is. And I said, no. I mean, like, okay, is it a good thing that you have that kind of access all the time? And they stopped and reflected for a moment. And, I said, what is it doing to you? And they thought a little bit more, and this girl spoke up and said, I've started to realize, I can't remember what she said. I started to realize ever since I got my phone or something like that, that I'm less curious. She said, I'm less curious about things because I know anytime I want to know something, I can just look it up. And I said, yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to get you guys to see. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that it's shaping us. And, as you said before, it makes, whether it's the web itself or apps that we use, they make it seem, and they try to teach us that gaining knowledge and wisdom is something that can be done quick and easily. Whenever the opposite is actually true. It takes hard work, it takes time and diligence. So it's reducing our capacity to persist, to be diligent, to focus, just as you said before. And so it's all those things that we need to be concerned about as well, in addition to just content. You really get into this in chapter 2. And I thought that was one of the best and most concise explanations of this that I've ever seen. So great job in that chapter. You guys were listening, that chapter alone I think is worth purchasing the book. The other chapters are great too, but that one, if you've been struggling to grasp this concept, Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. A lot of people say that and don't know what it means, and they can't explain it well, and whenever they think they know what it means. But Samuel explains it really, really well in chapter 2. If you want to go into that a little bit more, explaining chapter 2, the title is How Technology Shapes Us. It's essentially building and explaining on what McLuhan said in that famous phrase. Do you want to unpack that some more?
Sure. Yeah, so McLuhan's book, I think it's called Understanding Media, actually brings forward a couple different examples of how technology kind of creates different kinds of societies. And one of the examples in Understanding Media is the jet airplane. So I think he compares the jet airplane to the railroad, if I'm not mistaken. So the idea is that the railroad and the jet airplane are both revolutionary technologies that create different kinds of cultures. So with the advent of the railroad, you now have towns that are being constructed in a certain way to accommodate a railroad. You have industries that exist because of the railroad. You have ways of people, and this is more relevant for what we're talking about. You have people thinking of their lives and where they live and how they can travel differently because they have a technology that can get them, say, from Louisville to New York in a certain amount of time now. And the jet airplane is an example of that revolutionized the idea of what it means to be a global person. So before the jet airplane, if I wanted to think about maybe going to England or going to Africa, I had to contemplate a several weeks long journey by boat to get there. And that right there, the reality of that conditions what I think of the good life. So I might have in my mind the idea that if I wanted to be an adventurer or an explorer, I want to hit the high seas. But that is a different thing than having a jet airplane that says, oh, I can just travel at whim. I can just go buy airline tickets and go visit London or go visit the Savannah. I can do these things, and this is all compatible with kind of my highly modernized life because I can do that. And so that actually changes our definition of what it means to have a good life, of what it means to conceive of ourselves kind of as citizens of one country versus another, or as belonging to kind of a global citizenry. And so that's just one example of how technology creates different categories of thinking simply by virtue of what it is. We haven't even talked about whether that's good or bad or something in between. That's just reality, that technology creates those different kinds of structures. And Neil Postman really applied this to memorable effect in Amusing Ourselves to Death when he talked about the television. So this was a book written in the 70s about the effects of television on kind of public discourse, and the way that Postman was concerned that television kind of cheapened the exchange of ideas by turning everything into an expression of entertainment. And his really memorable way of stating it was that television restaged the world. So when people watch a television sitcom or they watch a entertaining broadcast, they see a presentation of the world, and it entertains, it comforts, it amuses them, it gives them delight. And so that actually in turn changes how they think all life should be. So classic example of this is the sitcom. So whether you're watching, Jerry Seinfeld and his three friends in their little New York apartment, or whether you're watching Full House and their, brownstone in San Francisco, you're watching a particular simulation of life. And particularly as people kind of consume this content year after year after year, there's a sense that, oh, life should look like this. Like life should be kind of funny, and people should have the ability to do certain things, and there should be kind of this lightness to my general existence, and a sense of like novelty every day. That's one example of how a stage can restage how we see the world. It's a really insightful observation, and I think the effects of restaging the world are probably 10 times more potent online than they ever were with television, because with television you are still dealing with a kind of a very definite technology that tends to stay in its place, and with the internet we're all carrying it around in our pockets. And so with Instagram in particular, when you check Instagram and you see just these beautifully staged photos of people in front of these gorgeous settings or with their beautiful families, there's a sense in which that kind of restages your world. You're thinking, my life should look like that, my family should look like that, my vacation should look like that. All the while, you're missing the fact that this is really content that has to be staged, set up, edited. It's really an advertisement. And so that's one powerful way in which social media can actually condition our expectations from ourselves and of our world. And it's an impulse that goes back to just the very nature of what technological revolution is, and how it kind of creates different structures in society that prop up to accommodate it.
Yeah, exactly. And they condition us to, like you said before, to think that we need to be entertained, distracted all the time. I think that 98% of us today, and myself is absolutely included in this, are distraction addicted. It becomes difficult to just sit quietly and contemplate, whether that's in your vehicle, in your commute, whether it's in your home, at the grocery store, whenever you're waiting in line. Like, we need to be distracted from the world around us, from the ordinariness and boringness of life. I've noticed that even the presence of those screens, when they're not turned on, are demanding our attention. One thing that we recently did in our house was we moved our TV out of our living room, because many households today, the center of the house is centered around the TV. And I recognize from reading books like Andy Crouch's book that he came out with several years back, Tech-Wise Family, how that determines the culture and atmosphere of your house, where you're centered around that TV. So we decided to do an experiment, move it to another room that would be just the TV room, and then our living room, which is kind of open with the rest of the house, would be screen free. And we noticed, it's only been a couple weeks, but we noticed very quickly the change just in the atmosphere of our home. There's less distraction by the screen because it's not, even with it off, it's demanding your attention. We've noticed our kids are asking to watch something less. It's there's that less distraction there. Whenever we're at home together, we're more interested in talking with one another, paying attention to one another, rather than that big distraction up there wanting to entertain us. And so, but because we kind of live in, we're swimming in the waters of this digital world, until we take steps like that, we don't recognize how much it's influencing us.
Mm-hmm. That's really insightful. And I found Andy Crouch's perspective on that to be so practically minded that you can actually change the location of something, and it psychologically kind of almost resets you. And this is kind of free for listeners, but that's very similar to what James Clear talks about in his book Atomic Habits, about, if you want to form new habits, make the new habit accessible and make the old habit kind of hard to find, hard to reach. And I think there's just something fundamentally human about that. And if you think like, okay, the fact that I have a television in the middle of my living room kind of communicates in a sense that the TV is the center of the family. Like this is kind of the center of gravity for where our family assembles and kind of how we view our relationship to our home. Think of how far more potent the smartphone is. So the smartphone is a television with unlimited channels, with unlimited broadcastability. It's far less regulated than a television broadcast is. And yet we are all not just setting those up in the middle of our living room, they're on our person for 18 out of 24 hours a day. And then for most people, those 6 hours, the phone is right next to them, charging while they sleep. So we really do have to step back from kind of how we take this stuff for granted now because it's 2023 and we're just accommodated to it, and to contemplate for a moment just how revolutionary this is. Like we have windows that can peek into any kind of corner of the world, that can summon any type of fantasy or satisfy any kind of inquiry that we might have. And we have those technological pieces with us on our person nearly all day, every day. This is just a remarkably powerful technology. At that point, how can it not shape us? How can it not radically affect how we think of God, how we think of ourselves, how we think of each other and the world? I think people just kind of, it's the slow boiled frog theory. If you want to boil a frog, you don't throw the frog into a boiling pot. You simply throw them into a cold pot and then raise the temperature. A little bit of a queasy metaphor, but the principle is true. Like, we accommodate to radical change slowly and incrementally, and we miss the fact that technology, in particular digital technology, actually has a revolutionary presence in our lives that we often really can't easily get out of. We don't really know how to change the ordering of our lives to accommodate that.
Yeah. So once again, moving beyond just content, how is technology today helping or hurting our growth in wisdom?
Well, in the book, I kind of highlight five different ways to answer that question. So I call these digital liturgies, and what I mean by that is that, a church's liturgy is its kind of set of practices that kind of reinforce gospel truth. So, there's a liturgical ordering to the church service where it's a call to worship, maybe with the proclamation of the word. It's a prayer of corporate confession. It's the singing of hymns and the preaching of the gospel and the taking of the Lord's Supper and of baptism. So combine all of that, and that is a habitat that presses the truths of the gospel onto our hearts. And the example I like to give people is, if you came to church and all church consisted of was someone standing at the door, and you come up to them and they say, "The gospel is true, now you can go home." Well, that's what they said was true and what they said was biblical, but that would not press upon your conscience the reality of who Jesus is, the reality of Scripture, nearly as much as the actual ordering of the service does. So the purpose of the liturgical order of the service is to kind of create this massive plausibility structure so that the truth of the gospel, the reality of Jesus, the reality of his church, those all become tangible realities to our affections. Like we feel that it's true in a way that is deeply formative, especially week in and week out as we faithfully attend the gathering. And so I look at the different kind of facets of the internet and kind of its ethics and its personality, so to speak, the way that the internet shapes us. I look at those as 5 distinct liturgies, as 5 distinct kind of practical habits and rhythms that reinforce a secular value system to us. And so I talk about outrage and how, the web just seems combustible all of the time. And there's actually kind of embedded into the internet, there are shallow ways of thinking and reactive ways of communicating with one another that's simply intrinsic to what the internet is. I talk about shame and how cancel culture kind of grows out of this this feeling of being able to control everything around me. I think a lot of people have grown up experiencing the world through a computer, and so they bring to the world kind of computerized values of, okay, if something upsets me or discomforts me, I should be able to delete it. I should be able to X out. I should be able to mute or block it. And then I talk about kind of consumption and how I think the web is obviously contains much pornography, but I think even the whole of the web is pornographically shaped. There's a pornographic nature to how the web kind of treats relationships, friendship, beauty, as consumable commodities that we can avail ourselves of and then dispose. And we stop experiencing life and just kind of want to turn life into something that we can consume at a distance. So those are 3 examples. But I think the book kind of looks at 5 distinct ways in which the internet shapes us, kind of identifies why that is, what are the aspects of online technology that actually contribute to this, and then if we compare that to what the gospel says, where does resistance come from? What is the truth of the gospel as opposed to the claims of this liturgical online existence?
Wow, there's a lot there, and what you just said that I want to get into. I'm trying to keep it all straight in mind so we can get through it. So let's start here. So can the church liturgies and the digital liturgies coexist? Because what I'm thinking of is, as you were talking about the church liturgies, is, well, what about these virtual churches, online services, and so on that are becoming more and more popular?
I think they can coexist. I am less. I don't know that they can cohabitate. And
okay.
what I mean by that is, I don't know that if you try to put a church online, and there are different extents of this. This is not monolithic. So some places have a live stream that they offer to anyone. Some places have a live stream that they only offer to members who are unable to attend. So there's a spectrum on here. But I do think that the value system of the internet is intrinsically opposed to the value system of the church service. So the church service calls on believers to assemble together, to care for one another, the one another's in Scripture, love one another, serve one another, prefer one another. Okay, that right there is impossible to do when you are spectating church through a monitor. Like you actually cannot do that through a screen. It's impossible. It's like trying to hand you a pizza through our podcast connection. I can't do it. It's physically impossible. But then also there is a shape to the web, particularly its values of distraction and consumption, that kind of turn church into a spectator sport. And I think why this is difficult for people to conceive of, partially, is that for many people, church is already a spectator sport. And it was a spectator sport before the live stream ever was invented or got put up due to COVID. And so they just don't feel the reality of that, because they've been going to church simply to download the sermon and the music into their brains. And that's, to them, the purpose of church. And it feels like I can do that just as efficiently in my living room at 10 a.m. as I can at the church. So why can't I do that? But I do think the internet reinforces the sense that this is a performance. This is a performance that I'm supposed to consume, just like I would consume a concert or consume a TED Talk. This is a performance that I'm supposed to consume. Hopefully, it'll generate kind of some emotional response in me, and that's the point. I get the emotional response, that's the benefit, and then I'm able to turn it off. That's just not what church is. Church is the preaching of the word, the proclamation of the gospel. Church is the embodied gospel, are Christians who are indwelt by the Spirit coming together, and in that the Spirit of Christ, Spirit of the risen Christ, is active among his people, kind of shaping us all into the image of his Son together. There is an inescapably kind of mutual relationship that we have with each other in the context of the church. And you simply cannot reduce that to something that you can consume. But of course, that's what the internet does. The internet takes all of life and turns it into a consumable commodity. And that's why, you can get people who act like they're your friend on YouTube, and you can kind of have like these simulated chats and relationships with them. That's why AI, artificial intelligence, there are already movies written about people who form emotional bonds with these chatbots, who can simulate personhood to them. That's what the internet does. And so I'm pretty skeptical that there is any long-term benefit from kind of trying to place the form of the church inside the form of the web. I think one has to break the other.
That's an excellent answer. And it goes back to what you talked about before and what's in chapter 1, which is the embodiedness of wisdom. Mm-hmm. And that how God designed us embodied in a physical world, and how growth in the virtues that he desires for us are intended to be grown and lived out in that embodied world. And because we downplay that, or we just have completely lost a value for that, we assume that, like you said before, watching church is the same thing as attending church. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something that, I don't know if you've ever read Doug Groothuis's The Soul in Cyberspace. He wrote it back in the 90s, and he makes a good point related to this, because he saw a lot of this way back then, and he said, people will think that and claim that, well, I'm having an experience of church, but he's saying you're having an experience of pixels. Mm-hmm. and audio and data, but it's not the same thing. It's an experience of images and sound, but not the same thing as being there. I think anyone who maybe has this experience it'll help to understand, if you've ever had the chance to see one of your favorite speakers at a live event, whether it be a conference or church service, that you've listened to a lot of their sermons online. I've had that privilege getting to see some of my favorite guys like Matt Chandler, John Piper, who I listened to a lot online, but then I got to see in person a couple of times. And the sermon is far more powerful and just different in person than it is online, because there is that embodiedness aspect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and culturally, we seem to be kind of coming to a reckoning on this, right? You have Taylor Swift's tour that is breaking all kinds of records, and 75,000 people are crowding into an arena post-COVID to attend a concert. I think there is an ambient sense in our society that we have kind of let the digital in a little too far. Like we've digitized our lives excessively, and I'm hopeful that this will turn into a recovery of in-person gathering, of kind of physical spaces that we can meet together. I think the challenge for everyone, for Christians, for secular folk, is going to be, how do you articulate the value of in-person, a physical community, in a context where it's just hard and awkward and vulnerable. I think that the screen offers the illusion of protection. I think people retreat behind the screen because it feels like they can be a little bit safe from the things that kind of make us dread being in person. So whether that's how we appear, or kind of not feeling like we're able to kind of socially navigate a particular dynamic, or just fearing that awkward silence, I think that has become a major source of people intentionally kind of digitizing their entire lives to get out of that awkwardness. And I actually think that's connected in a very real sense to the worldview crisis that's going on with regard to gender. So it's become now normal to suggest that I am not my gender, that the anatomy that you would see on me is not who I really am. Yeah. And I think partially that's connected to this sense of the person behind the screen can actually be different than the person on the screen, that I can actually kind of project my mental self adequately onto the internet and exist as a person in this disembodied space. I think that's a plausibility structure that makes things like the gender revolution more likely than not.
Yeah, I agree. I think those absolutely go together. And I think something you said before is also really nails it, which is that people hide behind their screens. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the main reasons that we become addicted to our phones is because we use it as like a coping mechanism for social anxieties. And so you see this a lot with, someone in a social setting, whether it be more private or out, in church or wherever else, and they're in the middle of a bunch of people, but on their phone. And so I think it's usually, trying to deal with some of those social anxieties of some type.
Sorry, I have a little daughter right behind me.
Yeah, that's
I'll
fine.
be done in just a second, honey. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
It's fine. Yeah, no, it's all good. I've got my puppy here. The kids aren't home, but the puppy's here, and he's probably making some noise in the background too. And I think that connects to something you said earlier, which is that, which was one of those things that I want to make sure we get back to, which is that people experience life these days more often through their screens, and they are observing other people experiencing life rather than experiencing it themselves. I think that's related to you were mentioning the consumption, digital liturgy, and man, I think that's powerful and a lot to dig into there.
Yeah, it's pretty concerning to me that, as I mentioned in the book, we've taken the word porn and we've kind of created a suffix out of it, so that if you want to look at beautiful pictures of a night sky or the Grand Canyon, you post that online, and all of a sudden it's earth porn. And if you take food, like a delicious meal, and you take a picture of it and you post it online, well, that's now food porn. And I think there's something significant in that lingo. Like we are inventing a vocabulary that kind of reveals that we know what the internet is good for. The internet is good for taking experiences and turning that into kind of this empty digital consumption. So food exists to be eaten. Food exists to be enjoyed physically. Landscapes exist to be seen and to be inhabited. They don't exist simply for content, and yet that's what we do. We turn it into content because it accommodates our cravings and our desires, but it doesn't really. It kind of leaves us feeling empty at the end of the day. And so I think a lot of people are experiencing this. They kind of feel that their day in, day out existence is so kind of simulated, that their friendships are all via text or via DMs. Their learning and their experience of the world is all done through Google or these online kind of web articles. They kind of feel like life is now funneled through their screen, and that creates kind of a sense of discontent and a sense of restlessness. And I think that's good. I think it's supposed to. I don't think we're supposed to have relationships that we only encounter online, or that we have this kind of virtual self, and this virtual self is out there and it's not really connected to who we are in our embodied lives. So I think the ethic of consumption is really endemic to the nature of the web. And a lot of people, a lot of men that I talk to in particular, and I know this is not just a men's issue, but a lot of men I talk to in particular, talking about, pornography and kind of, how to help men overcome this particular problem. I think there's something to be said for the fact that an addiction to pornography is an addiction to the internet. And that it's not just the particular content on the internet that's the presenting issue, it's the actual way that you're getting it is this way of experiencing the world that is actually harmful for you no matter what it's showing you. If it's showing you, friendships instead of pornography, there's still kind of this deadening of your conscience to living life online. And when you kind of show people that there's a different way to live, there's joys and there's real emotional presence and there's a sense of wholeness that's available when your attention span and your physical location are not fighting each other, when your relational bandwidth and your kind of output are not explicitly severed from each other. There's a sense of becoming a whole person again, and I think people are eager for something like that. And so to the degree that anyone might be listening to this who is kind of just struggling with online pornography and doesn't really understand why their resolutions and accountability structures haven't really worked the way they wanted them to, I would invite them to consider the fact that it may be a medium problem. It might be your life is being conditioned online in ways that you don't even recognize, and so maybe address that issue and see if there's not a freedom that comes there.
Absolutely. I would add to that I think that it goes deeper than just lust. So often we talk about pornography as just a lust issue, and men or women need to get their lust in check. And obviously lust is involved. But I think there's a deeper emptiness that is trying to be covered up. And I think that it's a lack of purpose and meaning being experienced in daily lives. And so whenever they are experiencing that lack of purpose and meaning, well, then they need dopamine hits. They need something to make them feel better. And once again, this goes back to the broader point that the whole medium is conditioning people to search out that dopamine hit. Because, what gives you the quicker satisfaction? Like you said, watching food porn or like going through all the difficulty of going to the store, the trial and error of cooking, baking, whatever else, and doing it for yourself. Even though we know like getting to eat the meal is obviously objectively better, a lot of the times we do settle for just like watching some recipe or cooking videos rather than doing it for ourselves. And so there's like, it goes back to an escape from experiencing life for ourselves, because life, even the fun stuff, the enjoyable stuff, comes with difficulty very often. Those pictures of the great hikes and vacations, to get to experience any of that, it comes with like a really difficult jog up a hill.
That's right. Yeah.
It comes with working hard so you can get some time off to be able to go to those places, and so budgeting correctly and using your time well and preparing well. There's a lot of difficulty that comes with that. And so we escape from the responsibility and difficulty that comes with experiencing life for the cheap dopamine hits that come from pornography or other content on the internet. In Impossible People, Os Guinness wrote that he believed that at the very bottom of the pornography problem was an escape from responsibility. That was it more than anything else. And I thought that was profound.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful point, that life is very much one of labor and of suffering and of kind of enduring the short-term pain for the longer-term payoff. And if there's one thing that the ethic of the internet is decidedly against, it is the idea of short-term pain for long-term payoff. Like the values of the computer system are intrinsically opposed to that, because it's instant gratification. Whatever you want, you can find instantly. Whatever you don't want, you can click out of instantly. And so to the extent that the web has kind of mediated our experience of the world. And I think that's true of a lot of people. I think people who are older may not really understand that there is an emerging generation of U.S. adults for whom the internet was the definitive medium for how they learned how to communicate, how they learned how to read, how they learned to experience the world. And for people for whom that's true, there's, I think, a category lacking of sacrifice, of kind of enduring hardship for the sake of something better, because the values of the immediacy of the web have just deeply shaped what they expect from life. And I think that's true of all of us to probably a sizable degree.
Yeah. Well, we've only had time to hit on a couple of the liturgies. Samuel writes about several digital liturgies, he calls them, here in the book. And they're all really profound. Like I said before, I have really enjoyed this book. I've read not as much as others, but I've read a fair amount in this topic, and I'm really impressed and recommend this book. And so you guys, if you're interested in picking up a copy, go to the show notes. There's a link below, and I'll have it linked there so you can pick up a copy of Digital Liturgies to read about wisdom, to read about how technology is shaping us in these digital liturgies. Samuel, anything you want to leave with our audience before we go?
I am very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you very much, Aaron.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on Filter today.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for listening. I hope this episode provided you with biblical clarity to live with confidence in our confusing world. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch up the latest from me, you can go to my website, aaronchamp.com. While you're there, subscribe to my newsletter so that you can be updated anytime I share new content. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Aaron M. Champ. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Until then, hold fast to the anchor.